The fluorescent lights in the waiting room of Harborview Medical Center hummed at a frequency that felt designed to unravel a person. Daniel Brooks had been sitting under them for 4 hours and 11 minutes. He knew the exact count because he had stared at the clock above the intake desk each time he convinced himself he was calm enough to stop staring at it, only to find himself staring again 2 minutes later. The plastic chair was the kind that had no give anywhere, hard at the seat, hard at the back, unyielding in the way that all institutional furniture eventually becomes, as though it had absorbed years of human suffering and turned rigid from the weight. Daniel's jacket, a navy blue windbreaker with a torn pocket he kept meaning to sew, was draped over the chair beside him. He'd put it there instinctively, to save a seat for someone, before remembering there was no one coming. Emma was 7 years old and weighed 54 pounds when they'd brought her in. He knew her weight because the paramedic had asked it flatly, efficiently. The way people who deal with emergencies learn to speak, and the number had lodged itself in his chest like a splinter. 54 pounds, the whole of her. And right now she was somewhere behind a set of double doors that he could not open, attached to things he could not name, watched over by strangers who knew more about keeping her alive than her own father did. His phone screen was cracked at the lower left corner from the time he'd dropped it in the parking lot of the warehouse 6 weeks ago and hadn't been able to afford to fix it. He tilted it now and looked at the screen through the web of broken glass. The battery was at 9%. He'd plugged it into the wall outlet near the water fountain for 20 minutes earlier, buying himself maybe another hour of charge. 3 unread messages. One from his landlord, Gordon Tillman, a man who had once seemed reasonable and had since revealed himself to be precisely as mercenary as the economy required. The message read, "Daniel, rent is now 11 days overdue. I've been patient, but I need a decision by Friday. I have another family interested in the unit." Daniel had read it twice and then put the phone face down on his knee. The second message was from his supervisor at the warehouse, a man named Phil Eckhart, who was not unkind but who ran a tight shift. "You left mid-shift tonight without clocking out. I need a call back before 8 a.m. or we'll have to talk about your standing." Daniel had been in the warehouse when Emma's school called him the after-hours emergency line, a recorded voice that sounded almost apologetic, to tell him his daughter had collapsed in the gymnasium bathroom and an ambulance was on the way. He had run. He had simply run, leaving his forklift mid-aisle, his thermos on the loading dock shelf, his time card untouched. He had not thought about the job until he saw Phil's message, and even then he could not bring himself to feel the right kind of fear about it. The third message was from his daughter's pediatrician, Dr. Renata Voss, who had left a voicemail that the emergency room staff had already referenced. Emma had been showing signs of a respiratory infection for 2 weeks, and the progression to bilateral pneumonia had been fast, but not, apparently, unforeseeable. Not unforeseeable. Daniel pressed his thumb against the cracked screen until the glass edge bit into the pad of his finger, and he felt the small, bright sting of it. He had taken her to the clinic 8 days ago. Dr. Voss had said to monitor her at home, keep her warm, push fluids. He had done all of those things. He had slept on the floor beside her bed for 3 nights, running, listening to the sound of her breathing, the way a sailor listens to weather. He had heated broth at 2 a.m. He had bought the expensive cough syrup, the one that actually worked, instead of the generic. His account balance, as of the last time he'd checked 4 days ago, because checking more often only made him feel the number more acutely, was $312. Harborview was a level 1 trauma center. It was the kind of hospital where the bills arrived in envelopes that felt heavier than they should, as though the paper itself understood the weight of the number inside. Across the waiting room, a television mounted in the corner was playing a news program with the sound off. A woman in a red blazer was speaking to the camera. The closed captions kept pace a few words behind, slightly misinterpreting the words, turning proper nouns into phonetic nonsense. A man in a gray wool coat sitting 3 chairs away was watching the television with the blank focus of someone who has stopped processing what he's seeing and is simply grateful for something to point his eyes at. Daniel understood this completely. He put his head back against the wall. The ceiling tiles above him had a small water stain in the shape of a continent he couldn't name. He stared at it. Outside, through the glass doors at the end of the corridor, he could see the parking lot and the rain that had been falling since 6 o'clock, a fine, cold rain that came in at an angle and made the street lamps blur into long golden smears. His wife, Caroline, had died of a pulmonary embolism 18 months after Emma was born. She had been 29 years old and had complained of leg pain for 3 days before Daniel had driven her to the emergency room, which she had resisted because she said she didn't want to make a fuss. She had been dead by morning. The attending physician, a man whose name Daniel had never been able to remember, which struck him sometimes as a failure of devotion, had told him quietly, in a family consultation room that smelled like artificial lavender, that these things happened very quickly and that there was nothing that could have changed the outcome. Daniel had not believed him then. He still was not entirely sure he believed him now. He believed in the principle of the thing that some catastrophes are simply waiting in the architecture of a human body, structural failures that no amount of vigilance can prevent. He accepted this the way one accepts a weather forecast, intellectually, without full absorption. Some part of him remained convinced that if he had taken her to the emergency room on the first day of the leg pain, something would be different. He knew this was not rational. He carried it anyway. This was why he sat in hospital waiting rooms with his hands flat on his thighs and his back straight and his breathing deliberate, counting the minutes with a precision that felt almost religious. At 2:14 a.m., he heard someone drop something. The sound was small and sharp, a phone clattering against the tile floor, and it broke the thick silence of the waiting room like a stone through ice. He turned his head. A woman had crouched to pick up her phone from beneath the row of chairs to his left. She was wearing a slate-gray coat, the expensive kind with structured shoulders and no visible brand markings, the kind of coat that announces its cost precisely by not announcing it. Her hair was dark brown, pulled back at the nape of her neck with a clip that had come slightly loose, so that one section fell forward along her jaw. She was not the kind of woman who ended up in a hospital waiting room at 2 a.m., which was, of course, the thing about hospitals. They ignored that kind of rule entirely. Her phone had slid a few feet and come to rest near the leg of Daniel's chair. He reached down and picked it up before she could straighten, and held it out to her. She looked up. Her eyes were dark, very direct, and faintly reddened, not from crying, he thought, but from the particular exhaustion of someone who had been holding themselves together for longer than was comfortable. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was low, controlled. She took the phone and checked the screen for damage with a quick, practiced efficiency. "Screen's okay," Daniel said. He didn't know why he said it. He had already seen that it was fine. She looked at him briefly, as though assessing whether to continue the conversation. Then she sat down, not in the chair directly beside his, but one over. The professional's interval. "Are you here for someone?" she asked. It was the kind of question that only made sense in a place like this, because in most places it would have been intrusive. "My daughter?" he said. 7 years old. Pneumonia. She nodded. Not a social nod, a nod that absorbed information without commentary, which was something. "You?" he asked. A brief pause. "My father had a cardiac event this afternoon. They're saying it was minor. He's stable." She said this efficiently, as though reading from a report she had already thoroughly processed and filed. "I'm sorry," he said. "He's 71, and he's been ignoring his cardiologist for 6 years," she said. "I'm not sure who's more to blame." It was a strange thing to say, and he almost smiled. They sat in silence for a moment. The television continued its muted broadcast. The man in the gray coat had fallen asleep. "My wife died in a hospital," Daniel said. He did not know why he said this either. There was something about 2 a.m. in a fluorescent-lit room that dissolved certain social filters. Different one. 4 years ago, It makes being here, he stopped. It makes it a particular kind of difficult. The woman turned to look at him more directly. Something in her expression shifted not to pity, he thought, but to recognition. The look of someone who has their own particular room in this country of grief and knows the geography. My mother died when I was 24, she said. Different hospital, different illness. She paused. It doesn't get less strange.